tell by the scenery around me that I am back in Western Washington. This was just a quick trip out to the East Coast and back. In some ways I just kind of wanted to see what it was like driving across the country. I had never done that before, even though I'd always wanted to, so it was a great opportunity for me to do that. I was in Boston mostly just for the holiday weekend to visit my family that I hadn't seen in years, and we all happened to be free that weekend, so it all worked out perfectly. So I just wanted to talk to you today a few of the things that I learned by driving across the country. So first off, my trip back was really very uneventful. I pretty much just drove straight back. Unfortunately, I did have to follow basically the same route that I did on the way out there because of mileage issues and oil change intervals, stuff like that. And also just time-wise, I only had 4 days to go each direction, so I really had to maintain my schedule. There were a few differences on the way back though. So first off, the weather wasn't anywhere near as good. I encountered rain for the first probably quarter of my trip. Basically from Boston all the way out to Ohio, it was raining on me. I did take a slightly different route through Pennsylvania instead of upstate New York, but the scenery was actually fairly similar, at least as much scenery as I could see through all the rain. I also took an interesting detour off of I-90, and that was a really lovely drive through the middle of nowhere from South Dakota through eastern Montana, just down some tiny highway through a bunch of very small towns. It was really interesting to see. I really enjoyed that part of the trip. And by the time I got back into eastern Washington, there was tons of wildfire smoke from both fires in the Rocky Mountains and also fires in the Cascades. So eastern Washington was very smoky, and it was raining ash by the time I got to work the next day. So let's get into the things that I learned from driving across the country nonstop. So first off, I always kind of wondered how much it would actually cost me to do that. I was estimating $750 for fuel alone, but it cost me $612 in fuel for me to drive all the way to Boston and back again. Because I was there over Labor Day weekend, flights would have actually cost me a little bit more than that. Of course, fuel isn't the only expense from driving across the country. I also have to change my oil now, which I prepaid it, but it would cost me about $42. So that's not very much, and not really a big deal in the grand scheme of things. The second thing that I learned was just how much there was to see going from coast to coast. A lot of people that I know that have done this trip, especially like my father, because he used to drive from Washington or Oregon or sometimes California to Maine for the summer every year when he was a kid. He always told me that, you know, the middle of the country is just all boring and cornfields and there's nothing to see there. And I've heard that from a lot of different people. I didn't find that to be the case at all. Even Iowa, which is kind of known for all their corn, didn't have that many cornfields. It was just nice, lovely rolling hills with a variety of crops. Indiana and Illinois had by far the most cornfields that I encountered, and it really wasn't that bad. There were an absolute ton of things that I would have loved to stop and just take a look at along the way, but I just didn't get a chance. I did manage to stop in at Mount Rushmore, which in some ways I kind of regretted doing. I feel like they kind of conned me into paying that $10 parking fee, but that's okay. I still got to see Mount Rushmore, which was kind of cool. But there were a ton of other things that I could have visited, lots of other national parks like the Badlands, which I drove right past and didn't have time to stop at, and things like Glacier National Park, which was also on the side of the road that I was driving down, but I didn't have time to stop at it. I even spent the night next to the Yellowstone River, which was an absolutely beautiful camp spot. And Yellowstone National Park was right there, but I couldn't go there because I didn't have time. So, I mean, it would be really fun to do this trip again, but take like 4 to 5 times the amount of time and make lots of stops along the way. So maybe that's something I'll be able to do in the future, but I'm still just glad that I got to see the entire country like that. So the third thing that I learned was just kind of some of the mechanics of driving east to west and some of the issues that you can encounter. First off, I didn't quite realize that the speed limits were higher than 70 miles per hour for most of the country. So between about Montana and Iowa, I was driving at 80 miles per hour because that was the speed limit. I would prefer not to drive at that speed, not because I don't mind driving at 80 miles an hour. It's just my car gets about 36 to 37 miles per gallon when it's driving at 60 to 70 miles an hour. And when you get up into 80 mile an hour range, it's actually getting about 31. So that was kind of unfortunate, but because I had to stay within my time limit, I kind of had to go 80 miles an hour. Another thing I didn't realize what's going to be important driving across the country were all the time zone changes. Of course, I knew there were going to be 3 different time zone changes along the way, but I thought I was driving slow enough that it wouldn't really make any difference to my trip. But what I didn't realize was that you lose about an hour of daylight for every day of driving when you're driving from west to east. And that caused me a lot of problems. I really struggled to stay on schedule. I was really having to push myself, and I got behind early on. So I ended up getting in to my stops really late at night, and that was probably not ideal. Going the other way was super easy though. I effectively had a 25-hour day because I was gaining an hour of daylight as I drove from east to west. So that was really cool, and it actually gave me a chance to take my time at stops and all that. The next thing I learned, which I already kind of knew, was that I really struggled to just sit stationary in a chair for 10 hours a day while I was driving. That pace was a little bit much for me. I would have liked to stop and move a little bit more, but it is what it is. On the plus side, I managed to get enough sleep at night, almost every night while I was on this trip, and I also managed to eat properly the entire time. And it's amazing how much better you feel when you're able to do both of those things. When I got back to work earlier this week, I was not doing either of those things, and it just really made me realize how unsustainable the way I've been working has been. So I ended up deciding to make some changes. So one of the best things about this trip is it gave me a good chance to think about what I was doing, because I was actually, fully conscious, not really under any particular amount of stress, and getting enough sleep and eating properly. So thinking just became a lot easier, and I had lots of time to think while I was driving for 10 hours a day. And that gave me a really good idea of what I'm going to do next. So the first thing I was a little bit on the fence about until I got back and started working again. And that was I need to cut my hours back to a regular 40-hour week. So that's going to be the first step in my process here. I've already told the guy who does scheduling that I'm going to need to go back to a 40-hour week, and that's going to be really good. So that's actually all settled at the end of the month. 40-hour weeks for me, obviously during peak time, so around Christmas and other peak times during the year, I'll pick up more hours as needed. But my standard work week is going to be 40 hours like a normal person again. So that does mean I'm going to have a little bit less money, but I can afford to do that now without bankrupting myself. I have enough money now, and I'm making enough that I don't particularly need to be working 50-hour weeks anymore. And that means I'm going to have 3 weekends, and I'm going to be able to go on a lot more adventures. All the other jobs that I've seen out there, it doesn't really do what I needed it to do, so we're just going to stay with what I have for now and just try to enjoy life a little bit more. I'm still paying off debt as aggressively as possible, so it's going to be slightly less aggressively, but actually the difference just isn't enough for me to just kind of give up large percentages of my life like I have been. So that was basically the end result of this trip. I got to see all kinds of cool places. I absolutely loved going on a long road trip like that. I wouldn't want to be traveling like that, every week, but it was a really good experience, and actually gives me a lot more confidence that it's super easy for me to just drop what I'm doing and go somewhere. It doesn't cost me a huge amount of money, and I probably won't do that particular trip, at least the way I did it this time, again, at least not for a while, but I would totally do that again, hopefully at a slower speed so I could see more stuff. But I think the best thing to come from this trip is just realizing that I can cut back on work, and it's not going to be that big of a deal to me. So that's what's going to happen. I'll start having 3-day weekends again after the end of the month, and I'll be able to spend a lot more time focusing on projects that matter more to me, like this YouTube channel. So if you would like to follow along, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.